So today or tonight, depending on your location, I will present a paper that my research group published last year under title "Freedom of Choice Adds Value to Public Goods." So what is this paper about? So here we focus on studying of so-called social dilemmas. And basically, social dilemmas are any situation that requires some balancing between selfish interest and common good. And they are maybe one of the most studied topics in a social science. So here we focus on public goods. So just a short introduction to explain what exactly are public goods. So some examples include judiciary, sanitation, parkland, but also some abstract categories as knowledge, herd immunity, or climate. And what they have in common is that they are created or maintained through widespread participation in public goods provision to the benefit of everyone. And exactly because of that, or because of their non-excludability and non-rivalry, they are accessible to free riding, or to people using the public goods without actually contributing. So in general, public goods can be thought of as some, so public goods provisioning can be thought of as some conflict between private and public bank accounts. So just to introduce shortly some theoretical background about game theory, as public goods are usually studied by within a game theoretical framework. So here I've put 4 stages of game theory development, which are relevant for this research. So and here just some main characteristics. For example, that when classical game theory developed, it was mostly focused on single stage games, or games which were playing just one round and between 2 persons. Later in the 70s, when evolutionary game theory was developed, some innovations were introduced, such as repeated games, so games which obviously repeat between various players, and also multiplayer games. So now we are not playing game anymore between two persons, but with more people. And also the interaction between players is so-called well-mixed, or the games are played in well-mixed population, which means that every player will interact with another player during the game. So that means that at the end of the game, all players will basically interact with each other at some point. In 80s came the development of spatial games, which basically included space and geometry, and mostly by means of lattice grids. So players will be set on some structure, and they would only interact with their nearest neighbors. And in 2000s, the games on heterogeneous networks were introduced, which basically means that you could change the structure of network by reconnecting links between the players. So in one network, you could have different type of players, and this difference is expressed by the number of neighbors they have. So maybe some players had 20 neighbors, others had 2, which basically means that they were not equally important in the structure of this network. And so our research basically falls within this type of group research. So to explain what we did, first I want to present something what I like to call standard model. So basically some model which emerged from all of these decades of development in game theory. So what's in common to all of these types of models? It's that in each time step round or generation, depending on what are you modeling, agents can be only either cooperators or defectors. That means that at some point they can have only one role. And theoretical development or some relatively high-level theoretical models showed that if we increase network heterogeneity, that will favor the emergence of cooperation. So in comparison, of course, to homogeneous networks. However, some large-scale experiments showed that there is not much difference, or not difference at all, levels of cooperation in heterogeneous and homogeneous networks. So basically, experiment showed didn't manage to prove the theory. So in our model, or in our approach, express their preference freely, because why do we have to assume that agents can be either cooperators or defectors? Because in human societies, but also with different social animals, the behavior, because we interact with many agents at the same time, we don't necessarily interact in the same way. We don't behave in the same way towards different members of our community. So based on that natural observation, we asked what if we allow players to express their preference freely. And besides that, we also wanted to check what is more important for the cooperation in or for participation in public goods. So topology of social networks, so homogeneous or heterogeneous, or this kind of ability to express the local preferences and to choose to which public goods you will direct your provisioning. So basically, you can think about it as interaction, as a global structure versus local structure. What is more important to maintain the cooperation? So how we did this? For example, we had 3 different networks, but we are using example from Lattice to explain our setup. So, for example, in traditional public good games, all players would only play. They would only contribute to one public good. However, with the emergence of network science and with its combination with game theory, each node on the network would also represent a player, but also a public good. So in our example, because we have a lattice network in which you have 4 nearest neighbor, that means that in every round of the game, you are basically contributing or choosing, do you want to contribute in 5 different games. So one game is centered on you as a central player, and other 4 games are centered on your nearest neighbors. So basically, players will have a more public good games to choose from. And using so on the right side is the experimental setup, which is control and which is used on the standard model. So basically, if you decide to participate in public good provision, you can invest 1 point to each public good. So in one round, basically, you can invest 5. You can invest in 5 games. And but of course, if you decide to be defector, your contribution is 0 to all games. However, in our model or in our treatment, we allowed players to, if they decide to participate, we allow them to choose how much to invest or how much to contribute to the game. And basically, the condition is that if they decide to participate, the sum needs to be the same as in control. So basically 5. So the minimum would be not 0.1. Yeah. So we did this. So our results. The blue represents the control, and the red represents treatment. So if you first focus on the first step, you can see that initially the contributions in treatment, the contributions in control, they hover around 50%. And this is actually one of the most stable results in public good experiments. So all the decades of experiments in public goods, they always show this result. So in first round, participation always hovers around 50%. And then if you keep playing, participation goes down. And as we said earlier, the public goods have a problem that they are easily accessible to the free riding problem. And in our In our treatment, what happened is that from the first round, from the beginning of the game, the cooperation jumped to around 80%. And as you can see, this is between all three different networks. So A is lattice, and B is a random network, and C is a network of degree 3 versus 5. So that means that half of players have only 3 neighbors, and half of players have 5 neighbors. So it's first 2 are homogeneous networks, and third one is heterogeneous. So this result was very surprising for us because we kind of expected that initial participation will be similar. And then because in treatment, players have ability to direct investment in public goods of their choice. So we figured that they will maybe start from the same point like control group, and then participation will increase because they can optimize their behavior. However, result was surprising because we saw that immediately from the first step, the cooperation jumped. However, with our flexible setup, didn't manage to stop the free riding problem, because we see that even in treatment, participation has downward trend. However, but because the participation in general is higher, we still got a really nice result. So to explain why this happened, we take a look at, so we compare current participation frequency with previous number of participating neighbors. So basically we compare current behavior with behavior in previous step. And here we see that that situations where you have where in previous round the more people cooperated, this increased the chance that in next round the more people will also cooperate. And we see that this was for each of these values, that this was more common in treatment. So basically, by allowing people to choose freely, we create more situations. Well, not we, players initially start to cooperate more, and by that they create something that we call a cooperative milieu or clusters. And then based on this nice and positive initial start, the higher participation continues, higher compared to control treatment. Next, we wanted to take a look at the total wealth created in our game, or total value. And here we have results complete results after the game ended. And we see that in treatment, in all 3 networks, that the final wealth was significantly higher than in control. So basically, in both of these, treatment and control, we start with same conditions. But just changing a small rule or enabling players more free participation, we create additional wealth. And in a B, you can see comparison of a current contribution to pool with previous payoff from pool. This is basically how we tested optimizing behavior of our players. Because if some pool, if you received a higher payoff from some pool or from public good in your neighborhood, that meant that in the next round you will contribute more to that public good. So our players were optimizing after all, but not in a way that we expected, or maybe not in a strong enough measure to stop the downtrend of public good provisioning. And finally, we wanted to check for the type of players which emerged from our game, because as you know, in game theory, it's a standard to have a cooperator and defectors. And indeed, we found this kind of players by checking 8 different empirical participation probabilities, and we saw that we have so-called pro-social players. So those are players who will cooperate most of the time. So regardless of what their neighbors are doing, they will keep cooperating. And their opposite is the antisocial player or defector, So basically, this player will play defection, or he will contribute 0 in public goods throughout most of the game. And third type of player is a conditional player. So basically, this player, he will react to neighborhood. So if his neighbors are also contributing, he will contribute. But if his neighbors don't contribute to public goods, this player will react with the same way. So he will also start contributing. And this is very, very famous behavior in game theory, which is called tit for tat. So we managed to find these 3 types of players in our game, and then we wanted to see how often they appear and where do they appear. So we checked, so you can see in B that we checked for controlling treatment, how often these players appear. And of course, pro-social players were in minority and antisocial players were in majority. And if you check a blue color, which is control, you can see that most of players there are either pro-social or antisocial, or most of them are antisocial and there is small percentage of pro-social players. However, conditional cooperators, they are barely present in control. But in treatment, where flexible choices are possible, suddenly conditional cooperators become relatively common. And we can see that most of conditional cooperators are basically in a treatment, with only a small fraction in control. However, if we compare random, regular, and lattice network, so from Flume analysis, we didn't include the random 3 and 5 network because they don't have the same. It is a heterogeneous network, so we cannot really efficiently compare it with results in homogeneous networks. But we did put some analysis in supplementary material if someone is interested in more detail. So if we just check the random, regular, and lattice networks, we can see that the structure doesn't really play a big role because all the players are kind of equally present in both of these networks. So for us, the main result was that it doesn't really matter what kind of global structure we have. So if we change types of network, results don't really change that much. However, if we allow to control which has fixed participation, which is basically standard approach in this kind of research, then we see that we can increase participation. So our conclusion is that the bottom-up schemes or bottom-up provisioning is more efficient in increasing the participation in public goods than this kind of top-down design of various structures, which basically represent social fabric of some group of people or some society. So of course these are experimental results, and we need to be careful how to explain them in the context of real world. However, I did include some examples where we can see that this result that we had in this experiment, where it appears in the real world. So, for example, something that I call a marketization of public goods. For example, the private sector has been, so the public goods are not only provided by public sector, they can be provided by private sector too. And we can see in many examples that private companies are basically including public goods in their price. Sometimes that is in a form of charging a premium price for some products, and they say that part of price so that this premium price goes to the initiatives, for example, like recycling or reusing resources, and this is very common in apparel or sports clothes industry. And then, for example, you can buy sneakers which are made from recycled plastic, which is picked up from the oceans. Also, what's popular, it's various fair trade or buy local initiatives, because these products will be more expensive than competing products. But this difference in price will basically be used to fund some local communities or some fair trade farming in poorer countries. So these are all things that are positive for environment and local health, and that's why they belong to public goods. And also one interesting thing that I saw is that some automobile companies, they are enabling their customers to exchange annual mileage, so to use their annual mileage to determine the CO2 generation, how much of CO2 they generate. And basically that determine the level of financial contribution required so that they can be carbon neutral. And they can choose from various projects which are always related to preserving of biodiversity or cleaner environment and similar. So basically the private companies are actually including private goods in prices of their products. And but what I'm more interested in is how can we think about results of this paper in terms of public sector? And there is one interesting example in Japan. So Japan has this taxing system where you can redirect up to 20% of your resident tax to some rural communities or smaller towns. I'm sorry, I have a small mistake here. To smaller towns in exchange for some symbolic gifts. And those gifts are usually some local products. So basically, this can be also interesting in a Croatian context where lots of islands or small towns struggle because people move away to work in big cities. And so in Japan, to tackle this problem, they allow people who, for example, work in Tokyo or Osaka to send some of their residential tax, which they would usually pay in the cities where they live and work. They can send it to for example, their hometown or some small town that they like. So for some symbolic gifts, but of course, when people decide where to send this tax, lots of them will decide, at least in my opinion, I think they will decide to send for sentimental reasons because they want their hometown to survive, or they want rural communities to remain, to not go extinct, and they want to keep the local culture alive. And these kind of things, of course, also fall under definition of public goods. And also one thing that we are looking, how are we looking to expand this research? So we are asking, for example, in context of political economy, can offering a portfolio of public goods to taxpayer be a viable political strategy? Because as we know today, and especially in countries such as Croatia, that lots of infrastructure or local projects which fall under public goods, that the decision about them, it's often made ad hoc, or maybe politicians are just starting some projects for election, then they are leaving those projects because money runs out or they didn't really think them well through. But especially today in times of global environmental change and now this pandemic, we see that there are some public goods projects which need long-term planning. So we are thinking if the system can be implemented where this kind of where taxpayers can decide where to direct some percentage of their tax, and for example in some long-term projects, so could this kind of political strategy be better than the current one which we have, and which is basically based on 4-year cycles and some short-term projects or reckless spending of public money to show something? And one example about which I often think and which is actually close to all of us that lived in Split is that a few years ago that we had a problem with Karepovac because it went on fire. However, if we think about garbage collection system and the clean environment which comes from having an efficient system, we can think about it in terms of public goods. But however, is so if someone knows better, they can correct me later. But my understanding of situation was that the money which was saved from residential tax for that project was used for different purpose, which was also another public good or the West Coast in the city. So basically, we had two competing public goods, but the one which was selected was maybe for aesthetical reasons, while the one for health was ignored. And then the consequences were almost tragic, as when Karepovac went on fire. So this is some situation that also makes me think about our results in this example. And finally, when it comes to tourism, which is very important topic for Split and Croatia, I keep thinking that can we think about Old Town of Split, for example, as public good? And not only Old Town of Split, but we can say the same about Venice or Barcelona or Old City of Rome, because these cities, so these cores of the cities, they're not only buildings, but they have a specific local culture and history, which also forms, because culture also can be observed as a public good. And then, and also this culture can attract people because it becomes very specific or famous. And this is the reason why people want to go somewhere. So not necessarily only for buildings or architecture or museums, but they also want to enjoy the local life. So in that way, if we think about old areas as public goods, we can try to preserve them, and we can explain this by saying that this is the also reason why people come to visit. But then on the other side, if we start thinking about this core of the city is just a space, then I feel that the old cores of the cities, they stop being public goods maybe, and they become basically just resources. And then if the city or the policy makers, if they don't try to preserve some function of this core, and this function just changes to accommodate the touristic sector, then the culture, the local culture as a public good can disappear. And in that way, you only have a city left, or you only have buildings left, and which is also nice. But then the question arises: do people want to return if they just come to some area and they feel that only thing that's there is just buildings? And in this context, in a context of our experiment and of bottom-up financing schemes to preserve the public goods, maybe we can think about some innovative public sector policies which would preserve this kind of culture of public goods, and in that way, in long term, this would actually enable maybe higher income and higher visits of tourists. But this is just something to start a discussion, because I know this is very important topic for Split and for Croatia, and this is also some type of implementation of our results that I was thinking about. So that would be all, and I would be happy to hear some questions. Thank you.